Well, it took a long time to recover, and it took a long time, maybe not such a long time to accept that I'd missed out on this big opportunity, because just before the Olympic Games, again, we go back to that state that I was in emotionally, mentally, that you read before, the heaven and hell experience of psychosis and depression. Had happened about 10 minutes before, or 10 minutes after rather. I was due to get on a train to go to Sydney to work on the games. So the dream was still alive and well in my mind 10 minutes earlier. But then the big bang happens, and then 10 minutes later I'm in a psych ward.
Hello, beautiful people. On today's podcast, we have the wonderful Craig Hamilton. Craig was an underground coal miner for 16 years before starting his career as an ABC radio broadcaster in 1999. From here, he was also a commentator for the rugby league, rugby union, and cricket at an international level. Craig is the author of 2 books, Broken Open and A Better Life, and is a highly sought-after international motivational speaker who focuses on destigmatizing mental health and speaks about what it is like to battle a serious mental illness. What I personally love about this conversation is Craig's courage in sharing his story surrounding mental health and bipolar 1. Craig, in the year 2000, was asked to be a commentator at the Sydney Olympics, a dream come true, as good as it gets type moment. Only for him, on the very day he was on his way to the Olympics, he experienced psychosis on the train station platform, in front of not only family and friends, but also the public, being handcuffed and put into the back of a police wagon. When I was reading about this moment in Craig's book, Broken Open, it was quite confronting. I felt like I was there with him and with his wife Louise, as they described her staring at her husband on the platform, coming to understand the true severity of Craig's state. I reflected deeply on this sliding doors type situation, how you hear of these stories of people being so close to fulfilling their dream, just within reach, and then all of a sudden they are on a path never considered, ever so different. What I am coming to understand is that as a society, we need these stories, for people to have these deep and defining experiences, to be able to share them with others, with us, so that we can learn from them. Craig shares that in the 7 months leading up to his psychosis, there were warning signs. There were opportunities for him to have taken a different path, if he had have known what to look for. It is in this conversation that we have the privilege to understand what these signs are, and what to do with them if we do recognize them in our own life. If you are enjoying this podcast, please rate, review, subscribe, share with friends and family, become part of the To Be Human Collective, and it's time to connect and reflect with the courageous Craig Hamilton. Welcome to the To Be Human podcast, Craig Hamilton.
Lovely to be with you. How are you, Jennah-Louise?
I'm very well, thank you, Craig. How are you?
Yeah, I'm fine. Living the dream at the moment.
living the dream in COVID lockdown times.
Exactly. You've got to, haven't you?
You do.
These are challenging times. I've worked out a long time ago that you can only focus on what you can control. And so that's what I've been doing for the last few months.
Yeah, I've noticed you've definitely shared that on your social media, and it's such a beautiful reminder, because I think a lot of us can really take such simple concepts for granted, but that is certainly one of the most profound ones to apply in our life. So Craig, I normally start off with a quote, and I read your book, Broken Open. And to be really candid, it was a pretty confronting book to read in parts. And I really appreciate that about your story, that you really went to the depths of what you experienced. And as a reader, like, I was there with you. So I'd love to share a paragraph that, deeply sort of touched me in that way. And you shared, like a super energized neutron, I'm oscillating between these two poles, bliss, and hell. Each high is higher than the previous one, each low and darker still. The emotional extremes are tearing me apart, body and soul. I am stark, raving mad. And then you proceed to share, the Eastern philosophers tell us that the greatest battle is within ourselves. A civil war is raging at the very core of my being. So where I would love to start, Craig, is you sharing both the lead up and that defining moment of when you felt like a civil war was raging at the very core of your being.
Well, the lead up to that point, look, it might have been a lifetime coming. It probably was. But if I had to put a finger on the beginning part leading up to then, it would have been about 7 or 8 months prior, when I first experienced what I would call the beginning of a depression, which I hadn't been ever able to put my finger on before. The benefit of hindsight, I had ups and downs throughout my life, but this was a time when the symptoms became more acute, and I didn't have a reason to be depressed or start becoming depressed, which made it even more confusing. But that was the time, the early part of 2000. Couldn't sleep, didn't want to eat, didn't want to see people, couldn't concentrate properly, had chronic stress, had anxiety, despairing thoughts, negative thoughts, all through, and that happened across a period of 7 months, and all the time getting worse and worse and worse. And being an Australian male, choosing to do nothing, and also having no tools at the time to deal with those feelings. And so getting to the point where you've just read that paragraph, it's the most terrifying thing I've ever been through or experienced in my life. And this was an oscillating, bipolar, manic, depressive, psychotic high, rapid cycling every matter, what seemed like a matter of seconds. It would go, as you said, bliss on one scale, which was just what I would imagine heaven is like.
Right.
Where you're just in a constant state of bliss, and the crippling low that just continued to get lower and lower. I imagine that's the hell state. And so I believe in this lifetime I have experienced both.
And what was really interesting about that part of your story was that you had been selected to be a broadcaster at the Sydney 2000 Olympics, and you describe it as, it's as good as it gets and it's a dream come true. And I'd love to know more about that experience of sort of getting to that point in your life that, you do feel like a dream is coming true, and then it sort of slips within your grasp.
Well, it was a dream come true, really, literally, because I grew up on a dairy farm in a town called Singleton in New South Wales, in the Hunter Valley. And from a young age, I was around cows and milking cows. And I was milking cows with my father when I was 9 or 10 years old. And to have a dream, to even dare to dream that you might one day even be a commentator, or I think my early dream was to play cricket for Australia. That was my first dream. But then as time went on, I thought, gee, I'd love to be a commentator because I could always talk, I could always follow sport. So I suppose there were plenty of dreams in my teenage years, and here I was years later on the verge of actually living that dream, working on an Olympic Games as a broadcaster. So dreams do come true, but this dream wasn't actually fulfilled because I didn't quite make it.
And what was the aftermath in that like? Because, you know, personally, I'm very interested in mindset. You know, how did you sort of bounce back from being so close to something that was a dream to then, you know, your life just turned in such a different direction?
Well, it took a long time to recover, and it took a long time, maybe not such a long time to accept that I'd missed out on this big opportunity, because just before the Olympic Games, again, we go back to that state that I was in emotionally, mentally, that you read before, the heaven and hell experience of psychosis and depression. Had happened about 10 minutes before, or 10 minutes after, rather. I was due to get on a train to go to Sydney to work on the games. So the dream was still alive and well in my mind 10 minutes earlier. But then the big bang happens, and then 10 minutes later I'm in a psych ward, diagnosed with bipolar 1. So having that diagnosis, coming out of hospital, it literally was a case of, here's your medication, we've got to change your medication, good luck. And that's how mental health was, very much so 20 years ago. So thankfully it's changed a bit since then, but it was then a case of putting Humpty Dumpty back together, because Humpty Dumpty was just scrambled. And you go through the whole, who am I? What am I? Am I ever going to recover? Will I ever be able to work again? How will I support my family? Will my friends walk away? All of those doubts that you could ever imagine go through your head at that time. I was angry, and I was hugely disappointed at missing that opportunity, and it took months for me to get over that. So I suppose, I was kicking stones, if you like, for a number of months. But then upon acceptance, which was the big change, the big clincher, accept this, you can't change it. And so now you're on the road to recovery, and you're on the road to moving forward. And look, I suppose that to get back to a good place where I thought, okay, I'm in good shape, probably took a year in all, which, given the nature of the breakdown and the trauma associated, I think a year wasn't too bad.
Yeah, definitely. And in terms of acceptance, what was it that sort of influenced you to sort of stop being in that? I know in your book you almost describe it as a state of denial, to like making that big decision that like, okay, this has happened and I do accept this. What influenced you in that?
It's a good question. I read a lot. I thought, I've got to educate myself about this stuff. I know very little about depression. I know nothing about bipolar disorder. I'd never experienced acute anxiety before. I thought I better read about that state. Mental health in general. I need to educate myself here to learn more about what had happened to me, what I'd experienced. And so I suppose that was critical in the process. And, just listening to other people's stories, not only from that clinical point of view, but I'm a sponge for autobiographies and personal stories and the challenges and the hurdles, some huge hurdles that people overcome in their lives. And I've just found some fabulous books. I went looking, but they were there. And each one I learned from, and every book I read inspired me a little bit more to get better and to become better, and even become better than I was before. Because the critical thing in all of this, Jennah-Louise, was I wanted to be better. And that once you make that choice and say, look, I don't want to be here in this state and just not improving. I wanted to flourish. I made that choice very early. I don't want to manage this card that I've been dealt. I want to move through it, move past it, learn and flourish.
I love that you shared that, you did your own research, because I saw in your social media, there was a post about you don't realize you need good mental health till you don't have it, something along the lines of that. And I thought that was really fascinating, because it sort of is like in a situation, particularly in something like your situation, it almost like feels like it's happening to you, right? And so you're then needing to like seek understanding of what actually has happened, which is, it almost feels like a backwards step. And I love that you kind of add that element of like you yourself wanting to get better, because I think that's one of the biggest hurdles with mental health is when it does tend to pop up on you, there can be an element of victimization that comes with that, being like, this is happening to me. I have no control over this. This is my life sentence and this is my path. So I'd love for you to speak a little bit more about that sort of element of accountability and self-empowerment versus sort of feeling like this is just happening to you and you don't have any control over it.
It's a really important part of the recovery when you accept it's your problem. Because it is easy in life to go, the reason the way I feel the way I do, the reason I'm stressed, the reason I'm angry, the reason this happened or that happened is because of A, B, C, D, and E, and point the finger elsewhere. But what this whole process has taught me is let's start here first. Let's start here. What role have I played in this? And that's not self-blaming. That's, I suppose, being honest and authentic with yourself and just saying, well, have I contributed? Some of the choices in my life along the way, have I contributed to where I find myself at the moment? And an acknowledgement that, okay, there's got to be some change here as well. And most of us don't enjoy change. We are reluctant to change, and I was no different. I've got a hardwired brain by the time you get into your 30s, and you've got roadways in your brain, your pathways, and just right, this has happened. Okay, I'll go down that road. Well, I don't go down a lot of those roads anymore. I've got other roads, and they're better roads. So it came down to a lot of those things, and change. It's a throwaway line that you hear a lot. Change is possible. Change is always possible. Change is within your grasp. Well, it truly is, because I've lived that and I've experienced that. So, that ownership of the problem. It's like it's like a hand in cards that you're dealt, and I likened that analogy, if you like, to life. There's your cards. You got the cards. You can't change the cards, but what you can change is the way you play the cards. You can play the cards the best way you can. And a lot of people in life play good cards badly. A lot of people in life play bad cards well. And so once you're aware of that, I got to a point in my life where I thought, right, that's what I'll do. And that's, you become more conscious of your choices. And I had to. I simply had to. I didn't have, in my view, I didn't have a choice. Because if I continued down that path without any change on all levels, mentally, physically, spiritually, I had to realise there was a huge spiritual aspect to this whole thing as well. I had to be open to that, and I had to not only embrace it, I had to be prepared for it to come, and that's been enlightening, to say the least.
I think it is so important to acknowledge as well, you share sort of the idea of changing your path where you've sort of lived a certain life up into your early 30s and having to make those changes. And I wrote here, I know that Louise wrote in your book, some people are tapped on the shoulder and miss the message. And I think that is such a common experience in our lives when it comes to mental health. I would love to know, Craig, what were some of those behaviors that you were sort of immersing yourself in before everything sort of came to that defining moment that now sort of, you've rerouted and you're doing new things?
Well, I don't think my behaviours prior to the Big Bang were any different or more severe than a lot of Australian men choose, which is played a lot of sport, and there's a drinking culture, there's an alcohol culture within sport, and I played a lot of cricket and I played a lot of rugby union, a little bit of rugby league, and it was a classic play hard, party hard sort of life. And with that came binge drinking, and I was clearly a binge drinker. I wouldn't drink every day. In fact, I would go weeks and weeks and not have a drink. But when I had a drink, I had a drink. It would be all night. I had no off button. And so a lot of this happened when, with, again, benefit of hindsight, when I was in these up phases of manic mood, which, again, you look back and you recognise it then, you don't see it at the time. So, and also adrenaline. I'm very much an adrenaline junkie. I would, particularly with work, I was very focused on work, very, very dedicated there. I wanted to improve all the time. And once I got into broadcasting, I was a sponge. I wanted to, because I came to broadcasting late in life. The early part of my story, I said I started work on a dairy farm when I was a kid. I went coal mining after that. I was underground coal mining for 16 years and then got into broadcasting. So I threw myself into that because I had to learn quickly. The learning curve was steep. So the way for me was to really work hard and, fuel that with a lot of coffee. And when I got tired, it was more coffee and just adrenaline. And the end result of that was a number of times was burnout, just burnt out, literally hit a wall and stopped. Someone asked me the other day, actually, what's your definition of burnout? I said, well, it's getting to a point where your body and your mind just says to you, I can't do this anymore. I can't do this anymore. I need to stop. And you just come to a wall and you go bang, and you do stop. And that happened to me a number of times. And my response to that was to do nothing for 3 weeks and just lie around and come back refreshed and then go straight back into the old lifestyle, having learnt nothing, and then till the next burnout. Yeah.
And I know that you share that throughout, because I feel like this is relevant to burnout, that something liberating in your life was learning and having the ability to say no to things. How did that sort of play into sort of your lesson throughout this experience of sort of leaning in and going all in and now being able to sort of, I guess, create those boundaries that are like an element of self-care in your life?
Again, very important. That the word no was never in my vernacular. It was never a word that I used very often. If I was asked to do something, the first response would be yes. Whether that was to MC an event, whether that was to speak at an event, whether that was to take on an extra project at work, if it was, can you do, yes, I can do that. And of course, if you continue to do that, then you would get to a point, and I did many times, when you get to a point in your diary and you've forgotten that I've actually committed to all these things. They're all around about the same time. I'm exhausted because I haven't stopped for 6 months. I'm getting to that burnout phase, and look here, I've got another 4 things to do in the next 6 days. And so the person paying the price was me, and I would always front up. I I was always conscious of the great work ethic that I'm not going to let people down that I have committed to. And so I would put on the face of, this boundless, bright-eyed energy, and I was just exhausted inside, but I get the job done, then pay the price for another 3 or 4 days, and then you'd have to front up again. So saying no and learning how to say no was critical. And you're right, it is self-care. It is self-care. I had to learn to do it. And there's a right and a wrong way, I think. Well, there's a nice way to say no. There's a technique to say no. Yeah. I don't know whether I should share that because someone might be watching this and they go, oh, he's playing
that on me.
He's playing that card. He's playing that card with us. He's not actually going to do this. But he's being nice about it.
So I'm curious because I know that you did a lot of research when sort of this came into your life, and you read a lot of autobiographies, and that's something that you're passionate about, and I am too. And I've sort of dabbled in the mix of reading autobiographies sort of based on people that are really respected in their area of work, sort of whether dead or alive, and there being an element of mental health or mental illness that sort of is behind a lot of their success and creativity. You speak about these experiences of mania and of being really productive. I'd be interested it's sort of a controversial topic, I assume, but I'd be interested to know, what is it like being in more of that manic state? Did you ever feel like your sense of creativity was sort of improved throughout more of that heightened state?
I'd have to say yes to that. And the mind is such a powerful thing in terms of and getting to a point where we can use our minds in such a way that we can grow and be productive without destroying ourselves. I mean, this is the great conundrum that people with bipolar have, and I have experienced this. But I know in the early stages of mania, when my mood has started to shift up, then literally it's like working on super juice or on super fuel. It's you can multitask quite easily. You can think about a number of different projects at once. You don't require much sleep. You're hugely energetic physically. I can remember being in those states and literally physically could not exhaust myself. I would train in the morning. I'd have like 6 hours sleep, go and do a 10-kilometre bike ride in the morning, have a swim, and then in the afternoon I'd do some weights or box on the same day, and then still be bouncing around like the Energizer Bunny. But as far as the creativity would go, I would go to bed sometimes, and this happened, I suppose, with both books as well, in writing both books. And certainly with some of the speeches that I've had to write, a lot of the great ideas have come, I think, some of the profound, I'm reluctant to use the word profound, but they are light bulb moments.
Right. Light bulb moments.
And you go, got to write that down. You have the thought, got to write that down. And I would get out of bed and I'd find a pad and a pen and write it down. And it would just come to be there. Before you knew it, you had a foolscap page of writing, and it was just there. And then you wake up the next day and you read it 2 or 3 days later. And I can honestly say it was all crystal clear and it made sense and it was valuable. But back to your question, long-winded answer, I think definitely in those states you can work at a different degree. The challenge is not to go past there, because once, in terms of your mood, once you get into the higher manic states, then you're getting up to borderline psychosis, then you're unwell. you've pushed the envelope, or the envelope's pushed you too far.
Yeah, I find that incredibly interesting because I know that, a lot of successful people or artists or musicians or writers and, all these amazing people, some of their stories are founded in, they don't take medication and they're willing to sort of go up in the mania because of what they create. And, sort of on the other side of that coming down, they're willing to accept because they don't want to lose those elements of light bulb moments or, profound sort of discovery that they don't tend to have in more of a sort of neutral baseline life. But I love how you share sort of, there is an element in which you can optimize that part. It's just sort of not pushing the envelope past that into psychosis. What do you do in those moments that you feel like you're sort of starting to become more elevated? I assume there's like particular things that you do in your daily life to ensure that you're kind of able to manage that.
Well, the number one thing I would say straight away, before we get any deeper on the whole subject, is that I made a choice a number of years ago to take medication for bipolar 1 disorder, because I went through a period of time from the time you mentioned in Broken Open was my first book. Now, that was written in 2004. I experienced my first psychotic episode and my diagnosis in 2000. So I was put on mood stabilising medication straight away, removed any antidepressant medication. I needed to be on mood stabilising medication to keep the mood in the middle.
Right.
Don't want to be high, don't want to be depressed.
Right. That's interesting.
I had 7 years of good health and no mood shift. And I made a decision in 2007 not to take medication anymore. My choice. I said, look, I just basically had the conversation with myself and said, look, I've had 7 years of good health. I feel great. I'm not going to continue to take this. And within 6 months, I was manic and psychotic again. My mood, my makeup, my DNA, if you like, the propensity is for me to go high first. I don't become depressed first. I become depressed once I've gone high. And I don't gamble. I found out the hard way that bipolar 1 mood disorder is a tricky psychotic illness which will come back and bite you on the bum if you're complacent with it. And it did. And it's not pretty. It's really not pretty. So I made a choice at the time, because at each high there is a depression. It's like a roller coaster. You don't get one without the other. So I made a choice that I don't want the depression associated was so horrendous. It's the worst. You would not wish it on your worst enemy. I made the choice that, yes, I missed the highs a bit, but I don't miss the lows for 1 minute. And so it's a trade-off. And look, I feel fantastic. I feel great in this space, and I'm very creative in this space, and I'm very well in this space. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there can be a lot of confusion around medication, and I certainly think, there are definitely appropriate settings for it, and some, may be useful at the start and people can sort of wean off. But obviously there is a lot of that element, which I find is like, if you genuinely have that, deep sense of chemical imbalance that is based in your DNA, that medication certainly can be a very helpful thing for you to stay well. What are some of like non-medication things that you do? Because I know that you're a big advocate for sort of, I know that you love talking about sleep, and I do too. I feel like it's one of those things that isn't talked about enough in terms of how it can affect your mental health in general, whether you have sort of a mental illness or not. And you talk about nutrition and exercise. I'd love for you to sort of share some of those things that you do in your daily life to help with sort of stabilizing yourself.
It's so important. All of those things are just critically important. The idea that I could just take medication and do nothing else was never on my agenda. I knew there had to be some other things that were part of the plan to stay well, because had I done nothing else, not made those changes and implemented those changes, then it would have been simply, I wouldn't have grown. I recognised that I'm vulnerable when I don't sleep well, and I'm vulnerable when I don't sleep enough. Good sleep is hugely underrated. It's where so much happens that we don't know about. It's just we rejuvenate overnight on every single level, cellular level, right all the way through, mentally, physically. So I made that a priority. I made my diet a priority. I'd really been able to eat anything all my life, but I did some research on that and changed a lot of things around in that. As far as my diet went, I changed the relaxation techniques that I'd never used before, things like yoga. I found fantastic. I learned to meditate, and that also was completely foreign to me, I might add, to actually sit still and just to shut up and think about nothing. I found virtually impossible to do. Once you stick at it, and you've got a guided meditation, and there was a guided meditation as part of the yoga class that I went to, I found, gee, this is good. And I would walk out of those classes literally, and it was like deleting the emails in your inbox, and your brain being the inbox. You walk out, what was you? I felt a lot lighter. So that was important. Managing the stress, learning how to say no was a big part of it as well. So, right, self-care's got to take, put further up the list of priorities. One of the other things was the work-life balance, which was way out of whack. I had to learn to have a technique to shut off from work when I came home. And I found that difficult, but, it's so important, and I do slip back. I'm definitely not perfect on this, but, work emails, I certainly modify or moderate the social media use, not constantly looking through that. Very conscious. I use it, sure, but I don't spend 24/7 on it. Things like that. Conscious of I think you've got to be really conscious too of who you spend your time with, because, I want to spend my time with people who have an uplifting, energetic, wide-eyed sort of attitude to life, and not those that want to drag you down constantly. And I think I didn't make good choices there. And I thought that's just, I sort of thought with that, oh, that's just what I've got to do. Sometimes, just suck it up. Well, no, you don't have to suck it up. If it's not making you happy, if it's not floating your boat, then you've just got to, cut yourself a bit of space, because if it's having a negative impact on your life, then you've got to make a different choice. So those things, on alcohol was a big one too. I had to recognise that the binge drinking was not having a good effect on my mental health. It would, because alcohol is a depressant. You feel good after 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 drinks, and you just think, how good is this? It's the old dopamine, and just gives you a buzz, and the filters come down, and all sorts of things happen, and you say all sorts of things. And
why don't we do this every day?
Yeah, and then you wake up with a hangover.
And then why.
And the hangover for me would, on those occasions, would last a couple of days and I'd just be fogged over. And I thought, this has got to change. And now, so my alcohol content now is, my alcohol consumption now is very much moderated, and I'm okay with that. It was more difficult for the people around me, my peer group, to get used to the fact that I wasn't drinking anymore than it was for me. And it was difficult. I had to be stronger. I had to be true to myself. I'm not going to do this. Whether you want me to, if it matters so much to you that I have 5 or 10 beers with you, then maybe you need to spend some time with someone else, because it's not going to be me. If we're still mates and we're still friends, then it's not going to matter. And it hasn't mattered. That's the thing. It took a while, but my close-knit group of friends recognise, no, he's made the choice. We're not shifting him, so now we value him as a friend. So that's it. No more peer group pressure.
And I love an angle that you shared about exercise as well, because I feel like when we talk about mental health, one of the biggest things that tends to come up is this topic of get out and about and get moving. But the angle that I saw you take, which was quite interesting, is, when you sort of feel more of that manic sort of mania experience, as you sort of shared earlier in the conversation, you would have days where you do like a 10-kilometer bike ride and you do boxing, and you'd fill up your day with all this stuff. And you sort of said that in these moments you actually have discipline to cut back how much exercise you're doing, which I found was very fascinating, because I feel like most of us don't actually take responsibility, that sometimes we can overdo it through exercise, and maybe we have to lean more into the yoga and meditation versus sort of doing sort of those more hard hitting types of exercises.
Absolutely. And that is something that took me a while to get my head around as well. But there are so many ways that we can ground ourselves. Now, for me, that's the key. Because when I'm flying off in all directions and I feel this, and I would feel this huge amount of energy just pulsing through me, and this manic energy, which I felt that I had to dissipate, I had to use this. Then these days I recognise, I don't have to go and get on the bike and ride for a long way. I don't have to box for an hour. I don't have to go and swim. I don't have to do anything at any great level to calm down. Just get myself grounded. As something as simple as just taking your shoes off and walking on the grass in bare feet, just standing in the grass. Something as simple as getting some sunshine, getting out, and that I find is really effective for me, as well as the yoga, as well as the meditation and breathing as well. Something we take for granted, right? So someone says, "Oh, you need to breathe." I said, "Well," a lot of people say, "Well, thanks a lot for that, Einstein." Of course we do. Everyone breathes, but how many of us breathe properly? And there's so much evidence now about breathing properly and the impact that has on our whole system. Mind and body, soul, the breath. There's some great books out there on that as well. So that's another thing. If I feel, particularly, it's good around anxiety. If you're feeling anxious, and and some people, for anxiety, they get sweaty palms when they're anxious, or heart rate increases when they're anxious, or a bit of pain around the neck, shoulders. Breathing.
And I'd love to know, Craig, because, as you shared, you wrote your book in 2004 and time has passed since then. And I know at that point in your life, what was really important to you and very relevant at that time was destigmatizing depression, anxiety. I know that you even at that point in time described bipolar as more of a sort of unspoken illness. What has been your experience sort of up until now? We're in 2021. How has that changed, and where do you sort of stand with, I guess, you're advocating for, more mental health awareness around this?
Well, when my first book was published, 2004, Broken Open, as you just mentioned, it was very much that. And that was the really traumatic phase of my life. But I went back into print again, put the boots back on in 2012 and wrote A Better Life, the second book. And I had a lot of people at the time say, why would you want to write another book? You've already written one about that. And really the second book was the tool book, if you like, which covers all those areas of well-being and lifestyle choices we talked about. But it was also a book where there were other episodes of mental ill health in the book talked about, because there was also a view that because I got back to work and I was speaking and life was carrying on as usual, that, Craig's fine, there's no problem, got his diagnosis and now he's managing it. But they needed to know that it was an ongoing process. Now, to get to the crux of your question, we are so much more aware in 2021 of mental health issues, so much more aware of the debilitating impact of depression and also how common it is as well. Acute anxiety and more so bipolar disorder as well, the highs and lows. There's so many people who are on the record who have come out, if you like, and said, look, yeah, I've got bipolar. And a lot of them very successful, a lot of them extremely creative, but there's a lot of people with bipolar disorder that don't tick those boxes. They have bipolar, they manage it, they're successful, but some are, some aren't. I mean, it's not a ticket that says, oh, you're bipolar, boy, you must be successful, you must be, you've got all this great creativity. It's not like that. It's indiscriminate. But what I've found is the more occasions that I've been out to speak at different functions as a speaker, that once I tell the story and the number of people who just unsolicited tell me their stories at the end of the presentation, because you actually give them permission, because you're so raw with yours and your experience, they feel as though they're quite comfortable to come and approach you afterwards and say, look, that's my story, or I'm experiencing that right now. I'm right in the midst of that storm right now. Or sadder stories. I wish my husband could have heard you speak tonight, but we lost him to suicide a year ago. Other stories where there would be, I'm so glad I'm here tonight. I saw you speak a year ago and you probably saved my life. That sort of stuff. And that's the gift. That's the gift. But the improvements have been huge across the board. We've only got to look, COVID has really pushed the buttons for so many people in the mental health area, because it's a whole new game. We've got our certain levels of stress in our lives, whether it's workplace, relationships, the money issues, they're all there. But, throw COVID into the mix, the stress levels go to a new level and everyone's more vulnerable. And we're just seeing that now. So I think the more conversations we have, the more knowledge we share, the more tools we have to deal with these times, the better. And I see that as very much part of what I do. Yeah.
And what would you recommend? And I'd love to go on both sides of this, with both people that are experiencing like mental health challenges. I'd love for you to share, what you would recommend if people are fearful of speaking up or sharing it with the loved ones around them. Because I guess the other side of the question would be, I know that this can be a big experience for loved ones being on the other side of it. I know, your wife, Louise, went through the thick of it with you. I'd love for you to sort of share, I guess maybe I can partner that together with, how do you feel like is best to move forward when you have someone or you are someone in a family that is experiencing mental health challenges but haven't sort of made that first step in seeking assistance?
I think the key thing for anyone who's in that situation, they need to know, they need to be reassured that it is possible to recover. And hear stories of hope, because when you're in that place, in that desperately depressed state, you honestly believe, you convinced yourself that there's no way I'm going to get better. There's no way I'm going to get through this. This is my lot in life. And, you're sometimes, and in many cases, the depression can be so great, the suffering can be so great that you contemplate ending your life. And it can be sometimes so, the suffering can be so great that people do take their lives. That's reality, and that's a tragedy. That's a tragedy. The sharing of the story, to actually confide in someone, is empowering, because you're then, someone else has got your back, and you need to obviously choose carefully. Maybe it's someone who's not in your inner circle in terms of your family group, because that conversation might be too hard. You might have tried to have that conversation before and you've hit a brick wall, and you think, well, if I can't tell my family, who can I tell? Sometimes it's too hard to have that conversation, and sometimes too hard to have that conversation at work. A lot of people won't go and knock on the boss's door and say, oh, by the way, I'm having a mental breakdown. I've got depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder. How can we move through this? And the boss, so many employers just go, oh boy, this is in the too hard basket. I don't know. So I often say when I'm asked the question, how do I get help for myself, or how do I get help for someone else that I'm concerned about? And sharing that conversation, if it's for yourself, lightens the load tremendously. It comes back to that old saying, is it a problem shared, is a problem halved? Pick someone that you have a confidant, you have a friend, and just say, look, I'm in this place. And I'd like to think that today, in 2021, more of those conversations happen and people are more able to share. And so because it's more open today, and it's not such a big deal to say, I'm depressed at the moment. It's not such a big deal anymore to say I have depression. I certainly hope that's the case. Because the more support you have around you, that's critical, to have that support network. Walking the road, as I did for so long, with just my own counsel, was not a good choice. But at the time, having an ego, having huge amount of pride in my capacity to get through tough times and deal with my own problems, and being a typical sort of Australian male, I thought, well, I'll deal with this. And, I was embarrassed about how I was feeling, and I had the old shame thing going on that I can't tell anyone about this. I won't tell anyone about this. And, down the track now, I go, well, that's just, I can't believe that I made those choices, knowing how unwell I became. So, hard lesson, but an important lesson, and one now that I can pass on.
I think it is so important to share with people. And I think also, for family that have someone going through a challenging time, I always suggest for even you yourself to be able to reach out to people. You don't have to carry the load yourself, because what I do find in situations like that it tends to sort of have a ripple effect on those around you. So it's about everyone being able to confide in other people. And I think also just being able to listen, just have the power to listen. Don't feel like if someone does confide in you with something that's challenging or a difficult topic, that you don't have to go straight away into fix-it mode, that just creating that space to just genuinely listen and have some form of compassion for what a person is going through in that moment is quite healing in itself.
Yes, yeah. So many times people just want to be heard. They just want to be able to share what their experience is, and just having that empathetic ear to listen without going, we all go into fix-it mode. I'm the classic fixer. Now, how can I fix this for you?
Yeah.
And many conversations don't require a fix. It's like, I don't want you to fix this. I know this is not for you to fix. I just need you to sit down and hear me out in a non-judgmental way. And if it becomes a situation where you feel as though intervention is needed, then it can be, look, I think, I'm worried about you, so I think we need to, I think you should see someone. How do you feel about that? See, have you been to see your GP? Are you seeing a psychologist at the moment to help you through this stuff? Do you have a psychiatrist? Have you to take it to the next level because of your level of concern? That's how I deal with those situations, because I certainly don't have all the answers there, but a lot of people think I do.
Well, I think just going through your own experience, I've certainly seen in my own life, those lessons can go a long way just through the power of story. And as you shared, you have genuinely had people come up to you and say, I've heard you speak, and, I do feel like you've genuinely saved my life. So I don't think it's always about, experts are obviously very helpful, but just sort of, human to human, I think can be very powerful in the process of healing as well.
Yeah, I believe you used the term ripple effect. The ripple effect is enormously powerful. It can be one conversation. It really can be one conversation that can change a life, and it can be one conversation that saves a life. And the best example I've got of that is when I first started speaking publicly about my experiences and what I'd learned from them. And really in the early days, it was about destigmatizing mental illness. And I was part of a panel. I was going to be part of a panel at a forum in my hometown of Newcastle. And I was due to tell my story, get up and speak. And, how do you get people? I thought at the time, how are we going to get a crowd? How are we going to get people to come along to a depression forum? It'll be friends and family. There'll be no one there. So I actually went on the radio the day before to talk about the forum, but I also described my experience with depression. Now, when I was on the radio, a guy had rung up and he told the producer that he actually said, he's talking about me, this guy. He said, that's my experience. He said, I have been depressed for 5 years. I've been suicidal 4 or 5 times in that period. My wife doesn't know. My kids don't know. My workmates don't know, and my friends don't know. And I haven't been to the doctor. This is the conversation with my producer. And she said, look, as soon as Craig comes off the radio, he'll talk to you. This is a really good thing you've done. You've taken that first step. And this bloke said, I can't do this. It's too hard. And he hung up. Now, that really upset her because she hadn't taken a call like that before. And when she told me, I said, well, I wasn't shocked anymore, because I'd heard these sort of stories all the time. Anyway, the next night at the forum, at the end of it, a girl approached the stage. Now, she was about 16 and she was upset. And she just walked down the front and walked over to where I was standing. And I just said to her, look, I said, I can see tonight was pretty tough for you. I see you're upset. I said, do you have depression? You experience some experiencing depression at the moment. And she said, no, I've only come tonight to say thank you, because the man who ran your radio station yesterday was my father. And as soon as he got off the phone, he told Mum that he had depression, and he told us kids as well. And we got him into the doctor. So there's the conversation, one conversation. Change a life, save a life. Never met him. I've never seen his daughter since, but I trust they're okay.
It's just beautiful. And yeah, it's truly, truly touching. And, thank you so much, Craig, for this beautiful conversation.
I love the conversation. Lovely to talk to you, Jennah-Louise.
And on a final note, Craig, I would love to ask you, what does it mean to you to be human?
You saved the hardest question for last.
You've been thinking about that the whole time?
What's it mean to be human? We're all flawed. I recognise that. Many flaws. I have many, and I don't beat myself up about them anymore. So that's one thing. I work on those things to be better every day, a better version of myself every day, which is always possible, more conscious. We are conscious beings. We have the capacity to choose consciously all the time. We're definitely spiritual beings. That is something that I have no doubt about anymore. If you'd asked me this question 10 years ago, I probably wouldn't have given it much thought at all, because you can actually sense that when you're on a path, and we're on a path, some paths, we're on a path, which there's a beautiful mystery about the whole thing. But when you open your eyes and you go, righto, we're on a path, where are we going today? We've got a capacity to definitely to choose as human beings. That's part of the human experience. But there's also that mystery that there's so much in life we have no control over. There's far more things in life we have no control over. And I find that the less I worry about that, the lighter I feel. The lighter I feel. So, focus on what you can control and let the rest unfold around you. And that's part of being human. The friendships, the relationships, what you do for work. I think it's important. It's so great to be passionate about your work. I love what I do. I get out of bed every morning, and 99 times out of 100, I go, can't wait for today.
Amazing.
What's today going to bring? And that's it just keeps your energy levels up. And so being more aware. Is there anything, is that good?
That's amazing. Yeah, that's pretty
good
good.
for a human being.